temporary chair. So it opened the floor for a nomination of a temporary chair to run the meeting per the agenda that we have tonight. And Julie's like 50 steps away from being here.
There she is.
So any nominations for a temporary chair?
I would nominate Mr. Clayton. You can if you can handle the gavel with your.
I've done it before.
All right, so there's a motion. Is there a second? Okay, LaPetra to second. And is there a vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All in favor, say, all not in favor, say nay. All right, it passes. So Mike, you are our temporary chair. I'll turn the agenda over to you.
Okay. So we'll do the call to order first and then
Yep,
then do
now
the
just
election.
Everything else
Or
is
just-
normal. Just
Oh,
follow the
everything else,
agenda.
okay. The May 1st, 2024 meeting of the Ames Planning and Zoning Commission will come to order. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory body of the Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and master site development plans, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask the comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card, and there's some out on the table, and I believe there's some on the lectern up here, and present them to our secretary. The order of the proceeding for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff, and then the applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Then members of the audience will be invited to come forward and offer comments and questions. Once comment period is closed, the city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all representations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for the city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and the applicant for clarification. And with that, we'll move on to the first agenda item, which is the introduction of commission members.
Julie Winter.
Cheryl Moss.
Mike Clayton.
Mike LaPetra.
Matthew Voss.
Jim Blickensdorf.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I have a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes of the March 6th, 2024 meeting. Is there any discussion on the minutes? If not, we could have a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The next item is the public forum. The public forum is set aside at the beginning of the meeting to allow anybody that would like to come up and speak on an item that's not on the agenda to do so now. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to come up and speak on an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close the public forum period. The next item is the election of officers. First of all, is there anybody that would like to be the chair? It's an easy job.
It is an easy.
So just as a reminder, we elect a chair and a vice chair. They're the only two positions that we have. And so the vice chair's only responsibility is to run the meeting if the chair is not here.
So what are we looking for, both?
We'll do a nomination for chair first and then vice chair second.
I can do the chair, if that's okay.
I nominate Mike.
There we go.
Second.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for chair? Go ahead.
Seeing no other nominations, all those in favor of Mike LaPetra, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. And that brings us to the vice chair. Is there anybody that would like to jump in and do that?
I can do vice chair.
Okay. Jim Blickensdorf volunteers himself. Anybody else have a nomination or want to volunteer? Seeing none, nomination closes. All those in favor of Jim, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. Okay, there we go. We have a new slate.
All right. So Mike, you got to switch with Mike.
Pardon?
This is transitioning the mic to the next mic, which was from the last mic.
You never have too many mics.
All right.
It's the order of it.
Okay.
So we're on number 7 on the agenda.
Right.
Review of the bylaws.
So I'll just step in. So we have this in our bylaws, the standing review of the bylaws once a year, the first meeting in May, that's tonight. So if there's no changes, then no action is needed. If someone suggests a change, it does not get approved tonight. It comes back in writing at a future meeting to make sure we all understand what language would change and it'd be voted upon at that time.
Okay. So does anybody have any suggested changes?
Looks good.
No?
I didn't see anything.
So do we,
You can move on if there's no
okay,
no
move on
suggested
to
changes.
item 8, the zoning text amendment to allow for rock climbing facilities within the general industrial zoning districts.
As a quick reminder, just please try to speak right into the mic. I just know from experience, the back of the room doesn't hear you unless you're right in the mic when you're speaking. So just be conscious of that, please. So good evening. I'm Kelly Diekman. I'll be presenting the staff report for the text amendment for rock climbing facilities. This is a requested text amendment to create a use in the use table for general industrial for specifically rock climbing and training facilities. It's distinguished in our mind from a gym or a fitness center. Those types of uses are not permitted in industrial areas. And part of those rationale for that is we want to keep our commercial service uses, our entertainment uses kind of focused in our commercial zones. So we have not allowed for those for the most part in industrial areas. So we have supported this proposed text amendment. There is an applicant for this item that would like to operate such a facility. The controls that we request is the definition be approved for the use, added it to general industrial, and then it would require a special use permit. So that allows for consideration of an actual site and consider the surroundings for that use and the operations of that use and how it fits in the surrounding area. So we recommend approval. We think this is similar, as we described in the report, to the discussion last year about the gymnastics facility, which is a sports practice facility. We think that with the special use permit control, we can really look at the parts of this city that are more commercially oriented in general industrial zoning versus the ones that are truly manufacturing and probably don't have appropriate compatibility with that. So we think allowing for this to be considered is an appropriate choice at this time.
Does anybody on the commission have any questions? Any comments?
In the third paragraph, it mentions that the applicant had described requirements of such a facility have a minimum 14 feet height, which doesn't seem very high to me, but is that something we would be looking at, or is that something that would be just taken care of?
No, I think
Permitting
that
process.
so the way that's described there is the applicant is trying to describe the types of buildings they look to rent.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not a zoning standard. So it'd be up to them to decide if they're saying they wouldn't operate if it was less than 14 feet in height. It'd be up to them to
Okay.
choose a facility. We won't specify that. So the only language we're looking to adopt is the definition on page 2, which is in the body of the report and underlined. That's a definition. And then you would add that use to the GI table, which is also shown on page 10. We have that text amendment shown. There's no actual performance standards or other elements required.
Is the reason for adding or potentially adding a new definition for rock climbing facilities rather than like modifying the sports practice facility definition? Is that to limit, or do you think that modifying the sports practice facility definition would create too broad of a?
If they were already that, we wouldn't have been here tonight. We reviewed that with the prospective applicant, and we just didn't we didn't believe the operations completely fit within that very limited definition of a sports practice facility. They're not really operating team practice facilities. It's really, the sports practice facility is really aimed at like a training facility for teams, athletes, individuals. This is a mix of training on your own for things, having recreational climbing, other things that aren't just literally training. So we thought it was best to distinguish at that point, just to not open up what the sports practice facility definition means.
And just confirming this is special use permit, right? It's
Correct.
not- Okay, great.
Is there any that,
Can you speak up to the mic?
is there any that does not require, I mean, is there a zoning that does include this without getting a special?
Yeah, any commercial zone would just allow this as, so if we didn't do the text amendment, it would default into the recreation entertainment category, which is permitted in all commercial zones. Their concern was they couldn't find a site within a commercial zone. Industrial buildings were better suited, and we don't allow entertainment and recreation within industrial. So that's where we got to this position of, is this something that can be distinguished from a regular gym, a regular fitness facility, a regular entertainment? And we decided we could with this definition, and we put it in the miscellaneous category instead of in the recreation category.
Anyone else?
No.
Yeah.
Is anyone from the public care to speak?
Oh, well, first the applicant.
Oh, is the applicant here? Applicant care to speak?
I didn't fill out a card. Is that okay?
Please do afterwards and
yeah.
then hand it to Eileen so we have the contact information.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Dosher. I'm one of the applicants. My business partner, Keith, he should be watching in right now. So hi, Keith. Yeah, everything that Kelly described is accurate. We're just trying to find a space that can accommodate our use. And we've been struggling finding commercial spaces that are an appropriate size, ceiling height, yeah, everything that's in that application. But does anyone have any questions for me that I can answer? Or yeah, anything else you want to know about me? Yeah.
I noticed that if I have the right building, I looked at it today and it's quite close to more entertainment area. It's quite close to downtown. So
Yeah. That's correct.
that's,
Yeah, it's just on off Lincoln Way on 2nd Street there. So that's a great spot for us. Yeah, we've looked at other commercial spaces that either turned us down, like the mall or North Grand Mall. We looked at and just wasn't a good fit for us. And also in our application, we kind of described the amount of space we need per customer. And that's the big difference too. If we were able to cram a lot of people into those spaces, we could probably get by. But because we want a safe facility, we need a larger space so people can spread out. So
do you have any concern with the truck traffic that is from the resource recovery?
I don't really. I've been back there a few times and haven't encountered a single truck yet. So maybe my timing's just lucky. Yeah, I hope not. But it is on a dead end street. We've noticed that. And then I've been talking with Eloise, and she's been super helpful talking through what we might need to be looking at in that specific spot. But
I have a question for Kelly is, are there any changes that need to be made to parking rules in GI to accommodate the use?
No, we would likely just treat it as a sports practice facility. So if it's an unlisted use, then the planning director uses what is the best available rate in that area. So it would be similar to a sports practice facility in the amount of area that they use, and that it's not intensively packed with people. So that would get it to a lower parking rate. And that rate is less than your typical general industrial rate in the first place. So they should fit in most industrial sites without a parking issue.
Do you have speculate about maximum capacity at one time?
I have no idea what that's going to look like for the facility. Do you mean for our
How
needs or
many
the actual
clients
building?
are using it at one time?
Oh, so it's an 8,200 square feet building. We'll probably have about 4,000 square feet of actually climbing walls. So at any point, I would maybe 60 would be max, 60 to 80. That would be a full gym that'd be packed. And that's not everybody climbing at the same time either. Yeah.
And just all those details about the site are what the ZBA would review with the special use permit. So even though they're zeroed in on that site, that's not the site we're approving tonight. We're setting up a process for the Zoning Board of Adjustment to look at the details.
Okay.
All right. I think that's it.
There are no further questions. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to come up and offer comments or ask questions?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any more questions?
No.
Do we have a motion?
I'll motion for alternative 1, recommend that City Council amend Article 5 of the General Industrial Zoning District allowable uses in Table 29.9012 to permit indoor rock climbing facilities via a special use permit.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. And the motion passes. We'll move on to item number 9. Text amendment to allow mixed-use residential development within the hub activity area of the Research Park Innovation District Zoning District, the Iowa State Research Park.
Good evening. I'm going to present this item as well. So there is an applicant for this text amendment as well. So tonight we're looking at a request that would affect the Iowa State Research Park. We have a specific zoning district for that part of the city called Research and Innovation District. And it really applies to the phase 3, the southernmost expansion of the research park. At the time the research park expansion was approved, we adopted a master plan to look at this as more of a broader concept as an innovation district. An innovation district is a terminology that gets used in economic development and planning, trying to talk about how do you cross-feed uses, have people interact with each other from different walks of life and different elements of employment, as well as having some opportunities for commercial activities and other things within a walkable area of the employment area. So when the master plan was approved, it identified an area on the west side of the park near University Boulevard where the extension of Collaboration Way is as the hub area. And that area has specific standards and allowable uses that are distinguished from the rest of the park. I'm waiting for my attachment to get up. There should be a map. So within the hub area, that's the only area where commercial uses are allowed. The rest of the research park, it is employment uses only, standard industrial research and development, possibly manufacturing uses as well. And so you've seen the medical clinic be there, a daycare has been established there, Ames Fitness has been established in that area, as well as the administrative offices of the research park. With that area, there's 2 lots left for development. It should be attachment A.
Sorry.
It's page 6 on
Yeah.
our agenda.
So there's 2 vacant lots left in the hub area, and you'll note on page 6 in the map that we have, there's also a pending request to amend some parcels that are further north. There we are, out of the hub area designation and go to residential. So the 2 orange stars are the 2 properties. They're both in excess of 4 acres in size. The research park would like the ability to add a housing component with commercial development on those 2 lots. So with this requested amendment, I think there's quite a few things you have to think through. This is an area that's kind of a quasi-commercial area in the fact that it's set within a planned industrial park. It's not strip commercial. It's not South Duff. It's not Lincoln Way where you're thinking about residential compatibilities. Typically, you're thinking now about industrial compatibilities is the way the staff is thinking about this. So we've described some of the considerations that we went through in this evaluation about how housing would fit within 2 different concepts here. You have the idea that you want to increase intensity and efficiently use land. You want to have a concentration of people in the hub area. That was kind of its point. You want to provide services for the people of the district, as well as services that can help residents of South Ames as well. So from a design perspective, the mixed use is not something that's probably contrary to the intent of the hub area, because we're still going to have mandatory commercial on the ground floor. And the upper floors could be housing and not really impact the design of how commercial buildings would necessarily be established on those lots. The factor that was of some concern to staff as we started to look at this is, well, what do residential uses mean in terms of future industrial users? And you can see that there's 2 different schools of thought on that. Some industrial users, if you're an office use, you probably really don't care if there's a resident living nearby. If you're a process that uses hazardous materials, you might be concerned if there's residential uses nearby because it can impact your business operations and your planning for how you do hazmat mitigation and things like that. So in our eyes, the addition of a residential use right here in this core area, it is a further extension into the area. You do have planned residential for the west side of University Boulevard, so it's not like there is no residential nearby, but it does bring it more into the center of the park. The research park in their materials describe that they think as the manager of the research park, since they control the vacant land and establish for the most part how the uses are brought to the park, that they think they can cite uses that are not going to be impacted by having residential uses nearby. So they think they can mitigate the concern of making vacant industrial land undesirable by the way they market and attract users into the park. And in this case, it is a little bit different than a general industrial area, which is a bunch of lots that are not master planned. They're not coordinated for development. Anybody can show up on any general industrial lot. The research park is managed differently. So there is some strength to that argument that they think that they can manage that use. There definitely would be some people that might not come to the research park. They might not have come here anyways. So as we looked through this, we think that we're recommending approval. We are recommending that the major site plan process be established. So that requires a review by the commission as well as an approval by the city council before it can be established. That helps us, I think, have the public hearing environment to address potential compatibility concerns, both of the residential being developed and how it's situated on the site. And if there was an industrial user, they would have a chance to comment, provide input, and if there was concerns about how that works, we can work through that at that stage. The major site plan process does also let you address site design. I think that's one of the questions that you get with mixed use. When you have a pretty linear corridor like Lincoln Way, places where mixed use kind of are commonly done on linear patterns, it forecast how that's going to work. In this case, you have 4 lots that are fairly substantial in size, but you're not on a corridor. So how is the commercial going to be designed, going to relate to the street and create that environment that we want to see in the hub area? The major site plan process helps us look through that lens as well and evaluate the site design, the layout, in addition to just the use compatibility that also goes with this issue. So we're ultimately recommending approval. The major site plan is probably the key feature to that. There are some minor changes to the design guidelines. The current design guidelines are really about focusing buildings in the hub area to the street or open spaces, but they were about industrial uses for the most part. So now you can see there are some acknowledgement that there could be residential or mixed use, and make sure the guidelines are acknowledging that as well. So when the major site plan comes in, there is a discussion point for how compatibility works in relation to those uses. Any questions about the text amendment? And I know the applicant is here to speak as well.
So just a question about if you put residential there, what are the transit connections and other services that are there for?
Right now, SciRide does run a route to the Plaza Loop,
Yeah.
but that's the extent
That's it, yeah.
of it.
I don't really have a question, just more of a comment. I'm really not seeing a huge positive argument to allow this. I don't know about other commissioners, but it seems like it was planned with the intention of keeping it commercial or industrial. And I'm not swayed at this point from a zoning consideration that there's a good argument to change that, but so I'm not really sure what my question would be other than that comment.
Can you clarify the location? This is just due west of the airport, right?
Yeah, so up on this map, the west edge is University Boulevard. The right edge where the blue ends on the east side, that is Riverside. So you're about a quarter mile from that edge would be where Sigler is, and that's the edge of where the airport is as well.
I guess to address your comment, Julie, I would say it's positive to have some more of that mixed use kind of development. And I think to the extent we can promote that, and that was something described in Ames Plan 2040 as well, I think that can be a positive thing.
I think it can be, but given that most of this area is supposed to be potentially industrial, I mean, again, if you have office space, things like that are very compatible, that's one thing, but there are no site controls as such that would make that happen. I know we're talking about an amendment to, what was the phrasing, Kelly, the site plan or something. It seems like it's not really compatible with the use that had been planned in the comp plan, but I'm just one vote here too, folks, so.
I agree with Julie. I think this plan, when I think about what's in that vicinity and proximity to the airport, I think it makes sense to be industrial, not residential.
And I wonder too, I mean, again, we want industrial space available to attract potential industrial folks. I mean, this is fairly attractive land. I don't know if that would be a detraction to a future industrial applicant to have some sort of residential use here. But again, it's a lot of speculative talk.
I'm just wondering about
For
the
applicants to-
proximity to support services, restaurant stores. I mean, they're gonna, in an industrial park there's really not gonna be much in the way of support for residential units.
I don't think staff sees that as an issue. Again, we have the west side of University planned for residential. The hub area provides some of those services with the medical, the daycare, and the fitness center already. No grocery store or anything is planned in this part of the city. There's not enough mass of people that there's a demand to support larger retail establishments. So whether it's here or further to the west, like on Cedar Lane or in the Aurora area, there's probably not going to be a significant commercial node developed outside of users that go here. This is kind of long term. There might be some commercial on the west side of University to kind of mirror this area, but that's long term. But I doubt it's going to be a large commercial center that could support a grocery store without a significant amount of increased density in the area.
Is the south, is that then on the far south? I know you said University was the west.
Yeah, so west is University. Airport Road is further north. It's off the map.
Oh, okay. So we're
Yeah,
south
so
of
South
Airport.
Loop, those white lots you see just to the north of the park, that would be frontage on South Loop Drive.
Okay.
Then you have
okay.
another set of lots before you get to Airport.
Okay.
Another point of reference too, well, you can see the kind of diamond shape just to the left of the upper star. That's where the university's economic development is.
Okay. Yep.
To the left of it is the McFarland Clinic facility, and then to the south, just on the south side of that little road you can kind of see, that's the Ames Fitness Center.
Green area on the northern side, that's a set of trails.
County
Space.
Park, the Tedesco Learning Center.
Question for staff then. My main concern at this point is it's planned industrial, and how do we, I know, I apologize, Kelly, I'm sure you spelled this out very eloquently in the memo, but what would be the future considerations for setbacks and other things, just to make sure that you didn't have a non-compatible?
So for us, I think in the guidelines, we want to acknowledge that the traditional compatibility issues of loading areas and things like that would go into the consideration. Those were not exactly staff's concerns. Staff's concerns are not able to be mitigated by setbacks.
Okay.
A chlorine gas release doesn't care if you're 100 feet from a property line or not. So that's an example of just general hazmat compatibility. The businesses have to manage their own materials. They have to acknowledge where sensitive receptors are and plan how to mitigate that. And that can include shelter in place requirements and all kinds of things. So we didn't write extra setbacks, or buffering like landscape buffers, because we didn't view that as the primary compatibility issue. Those are the things you normally would see in a commercial zone, right? Like loading areas, proximity to other housing, keep the noise down, the trash and all of that stuff. Those things will get dealt with. The broader issue of just general compatibility with industrial setbacks don't address that in our eyes.
Okay, so then one follow-up question, and then I'll be quiet. But so say, for example, we mixed use with a residential component, industrial use were to come through then. They have any special consideration to where you would have an opportunity to, how is the city going to plan to make sure that that's dealt with at the time? Because right now we're all speculative with who may come in, but
Right. So the North Star, there's a large vacant industrial lot there in that blue area to the right of it. That's really the immediately developable piece that will someday have an industrial user on it. So they're a by right use. So we would be able to say no because they're adjacent to residential. We'll be able to look at, again, loading and things of that nature. We can incorporate your traditional buffering requirements in at that point. From that business operations point, it's really on them. We don't have any particular limits on a business use. It's going to be them managing their own operations and having to plan for it. Again, this all depends if they have hazmat
right
or not. So they'll be through a hazmat review and they have to do their own requirements to meet that. It's not really a zoning issue.
Okay.
This might be a question when the applicant comes up, but of the various research park, like how many businesses would be having that heavier industrial use with chemicals or things like that?
I would have to
the
defer
buildings
to
that-
the applicant on the tenant mix. I think like an easy example is way north in the industrial park is Biova. They're a company that has materials that have a hazmat plan. They're at the north end of the park. They're not here. So that's an example, but I don't know the mix of tenants. Immediately right now, there's none of those users, but the rest of the park, I couldn't tell you. Plus there's vacant lots to the east.
Any more questions for Kelly?
Just so I don't have to go leafing through here, Kelly, what's the blue again and what's the tan for the uses as
So-
they currently are?
Right. So the blue in the master plan represented just industrial. So that's
Okay.
again, R&D,
Okay.
general industrial manufacturing. Warehousing isn't allowed use here. So it's more your more upper level industrial office uses. The pink, beige, whatever color that is, that's the hub area where commercial uses are allowed. In the blue area, commercial is not allowed. So
Okay.
you can do industrial or commercial in the hub. You can only do industrial in the blue.
Okay.
And then the green is the mandatory open spaces.
So previously we were allowing industrial unchanged in the places, the tan or the beige or whatever. That's currently commercial. And our decision is whether we also allow upper story residential.
Correct. And
Okay.
and the 2 stars represent the 2 vacant lots that remain in the hub area.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So I imagine it would be safe to say that the type of buildings that would be, you could expect there would be, like say what you have on, say Mortensen Parkway between the cafe and Kent Avenue. You have 2 and 3 story buildings.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, the format, yes, I would say the format
Yeah,
could be
commercial on the
that.
ground floor and office space on the ground floor, and then
Yep.
floor or 2 of residential.
But there's no industrial up there, right? It's just, that's the style you're talking about.
That's just a style.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, at this time, would the applicant like to come up and speak?
Good evening. My name is Kyle Martin, 1805 Collaboration Place. I'm the operations manager at the Research Park, and I'm responsible for the development out here. And I want to start by thanking the staff and also the commission for talking about this topic. I thought I'd start with a couple things and just so right now we have 500 acres developed on about 300 of those. There's 120 tenants, 2,500 employees working out there any given day. And probably the number one feedback we get when we're talking to current tenants, but also talking to prospects is, okay, if we're going to set up this beachhead location, where are my people going to live? And that's one of the main problems we're trying to address with this. And just to reference this map a little bit more and to give some more insight into that, is north of the green, which is Tedesco Park, is Research Park Primary. That's what we have 8 of our buildings, 500,000 square feet that we manage right there. And then everything south is new development. So the core facility is that rectangle right there. McFarland.
We're
Sorry.
going to bring up Google Maps since
Oh,
everybody wants a
perfect.
better
That's a good idea.
representation of the area.
Had to use Google to find Google.
That's one way to do it. So right there is good.
Perfect. Yeah. So another good, about 1 million square feet, and about 800,000 of those square feet are all office users working on innovation, working on new technologies, partnering with Iowa State University and recruiting the students of Iowa State University to do that innovation. So our plan, our goal, our idea for these mixed use development isn't to have lab on the first floor or some machinery tinkering on the first floor. It's to have office users because that's what our need is, and that's what the people we're trying to serve. So from the hazmat standpoint, the only company we have right now in the research park is Biova that deals with hazmat, and we won't, that's not in our pipeline right now or in the foreseeable future. As far as other industrial areas, so like I mentioned earlier, out of the 500 acres, we have plenty of land to develop on. The land to the east of the core facility and then running up north down Riverside towards Sigler is about 60 acres of pre-platted land with the city of Ames already set aside for other uses. Also, our industrial looks a little bit different than heavy manufacturing or mass manufacturing or large industrial. A lot of the large industrial that you see that we've seen in town, we partner with Ames Chamber of Commerce and try and recommend they go to Prairie View Industrial where there's more capabilities for that prospect to be successful. Our land covenants don't allow us to do heavy trucking, heavy manufacturing. We don't have the road infrastructure for it. So from a industrial standpoint, the closest we get is maybe BI, but again, we're not talking labs at all in this development plan. So that's why we made the request. That's kind of what we're looking to achieve. Able to have, we have a really cool nucleus of activity happening right at the core facility. We have McFarland Clinic, the daycare, the gym. The gym gets 6,000 visitors a week. Again, a lot of the requests that we get is, where can we live? We don't want to live in other communities. We don't want to drive close to town. We live and we breathe in our offices because we're trying to work on the next big invention. We want to be as close as possible. So that's what we're hoping to solve here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
So I think I read something about you, to meet accessibility requirements, you'd have to have at least one housing unit on the floor.
Yep.
So do you picture it being people mostly living there that you're drawing in for the whole thing?
For the research park?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, is the answer. So a lot of our larger companies like Workiva, John Deere, Pivot Bio, Vermeer, Sukup, a lot of the talent they recruit is right out of Iowa State University. Students want to stay in Ames. So being able to give them an opportunity to live here as a young professional, or having students that are relocating or employees relocating from other areas for employment, we want to give them a place to live too.
Question, but maybe we're calmed a bit about the compatible industrial use, but I still think this is prime land for commercial and industrial uses, that if we have it go to residential, I don't know, maybe that's a staff, if staff has any comments about that. That's obviously beyond the specific land use compatibility, but if we should really be allowing mixed use in an area that was intended to be commercial and industrial use, but or mostly just commercial for that portion.
There are questions for the applicant right now. So
Okay.
Kelly, can I address one other comment?
Yes.
Okay. Julia, just to answer your comment, and I think it's a great comment, but what I'd say about the two lots that we've picked here very strategically is they fall within the hub activity area, which we would only target, and we only really want to target for amenities because we have so much other land to develop for industrial. So even if we are light years away from ever thinking that we don't have enough land, but even if the subsequent projects from this, they would fall to other lots. So it's not a if, or it's not an or dilemma here. It's more so, how can we build out the park? And we believe putting an HAA, getting mixed use there allows us to do that. The other component of this is getting the amount of foot traffic to out here in the research park to be able to recruit these amenities out here. Putting residential above it, putting those young professionals above it will definitely help us attract those people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always hard to say who you want out here. Trust me, we have a wish list of the type of amenities that we want to bring to the research park and that our tenants want us to bring to the research park as well. It's hard to say that today in the planning phase, but again, this would be for amenity usage and not industrial.
Okay.
Are most of the buildings in the park now single story?
No, we actually have a pretty good mixture. So the airport being close by does provide some height restrictions, right? And I think it's roughly about 30. Damien would know that off the top of his head. But Pivot Bio is 2 stories, Vermeer is 2 stories, BI is 2 stories, and those are all on South Loop Drive, just across on the other side of Riverside from the airport. So we have a mix of single story and 2-story.
Any further questions?
I'm trying to picture the people living there. You know, you're saying young professionals. I think in Ames, you know, there's sometimes a clash of populations. And are these going to be, would these be upper end apartments?
Mm-hmm.
And would you have some amenities for the people living in the apartments? Would that have to be included to upper end apartments instead of down, I guess?
Sure. That's a great question. There are amenities close by. We're targeting young professionals. We're not targeting low income. We're not targeting freshmen, sophomores. We're targeting young professionals that work out in the research park that want to live close to their work every day. The beauty of that too is we feel like we're doing it at the right time. Interest rates are spiking. Getting a mortgage over renting is really, really hard. Shoot, if I was buying a house for the first time right now, I wouldn't. I would just go rent. So my standard for renting goes up, which is what the research park and whoever and our partner are interested in.
No, I am actually glad that we pulled the map up because being able, I mean, Wessex is obviously where a lot of these folks end up renting.
Yeah.
So you want a more that's close to all these offices. I get
Yeah.
it.
Um,
It would be a nice walk to go through that Tedesco learning environment to the office, right?
Totally. Or the same thing to work Kiva, or any of the buildings on North Loop and South Loop Drive.
Yeah.
That trail is such a good amenity.
Yep.
And used very heavily. Speaking of height, Kelly, in the design guidelines I noticed in section 10, I think it was 10D, maybe it was 5D, section 5. There was design guidelines for 12-foot height in the mixed use. And I think I would just ask that only be applicable for the first floor and not the second or thirds. I think that's probably how it was intended, but just so with the airport height restrictions, we don't want to be limited there. So we would just ask that the committee entertain that.
Any further questions?
No, I will. And then the last thing I'll say about in the park outside of Iowa, misconception that we get at the research park is John Deere. So John Deere runs sprayers and they have their PV&V and test facilities outside of town. They are only spraying water. They're testing their cameras, they're testing their sensors and trying to get smarter on the ag machine. So I just wanted to maybe address that in case it wasn't. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to?
Good evening, Chuck Winkleblack, Hunziker Companies, 105 16th Street. We've been working with the research park on developing at least the southern two of these lots. And Kyle hit on a lot of great points, but I think, you know, it's a little bit of a misnomer that says this is an industrial lot and it's zoned that way, but these were, I think, always intended to have more commercial uses rather than industrial uses. It was amenities. I mean, I think what's telling about this is if you look on this map, you can't see a restaurant anywhere. I mean, you have to go to Provisions is the closest place where you can sit down and have something to eat. So when we look at the first floor of this building, we look at it as a bar, restaurant, someplace where the people that live and work there can go, other service type amenities that will be an enhancement to the research park and for the people that live and work there. And again, when I'm talking to those people about leasing space, it's about the critical mass of people. How many people are around here? How many people work here on a daily basis? And, the research park, they've been at this a long time. And when they talk about the hazardous materials and stuff, they purposefully put a daycare center there, and those kids are outside. So I can't imagine that they're going to allow a use that's going to have hazardous materials that are going to be exposing the folks in the daycare center there they just won't do that. So I think the other thing that when Kyle talked about it, a big in buzzwords we talk about now in the world of the live, work, play, a lot of the folks that are at the research park, Workiva in particular, those folks, their environment, their footprint is pretty small. Some of them don't have cars. They want to be able to live and get something to eat, and either they ride a bike, they may or may not have a car. So all of those things are really important, and we feel like we need to grow the amenities park so that the people that live there, we don't want them to drive to South Duff or other places because there just aren't any other services around there. So we went to the Chamber and Economic Development Commission. We go once a year to a sister community, and last year we went to West Lafayette, Indiana, Purdue University, and they kept saying in their research park area, housing. The people want to live there. We don't really have a great source of housing around for people that, Ames has had a void in, almost 40 years that I've lived here of what do people do when they're 25 to 35? They don't want to, they're tired of the college scene, but they don't want to go places where they see people like me. Their place closes down at 8:30 at night. And so that's really what we're trying to get some traction with out here is some amenities to keep younger people in our community after they have graduated from Iowa State. So we feel like this gives us an opportunity. And what we're looking at for what we have planned conceptually for these lots, for the first one anyways, is we would have about 30,000 square feet of commercial uses. So it's not displacing any uses. We feel like we're just enhancing the commercial uses that would be on. We're not likely to do, although Kyle gave some examples of, some of the industries and businesses that have commercial on the second floor. But more times than not, it's in a single story level. So we have capacity, we have space that we feel like we're better utilizing the land. We get accused of sprawl and that kind of stuff, where here we have places where we feel like we can better utilize the land resource that we have, allow places for people to live, and provide amenities for the people that work in the research park, and some other amenities for the people that live in the southern part of Ames, so they don't have to fight the traffic over on South Duff. Thank you.
Sir, if you could fill out a card if you haven't, speaker's card. Thanks. All right. Commission comments?
I think I would just say, as someone who generally does fit in that age range and sort of young professional demographic, I would agree that this would be a pretty attractive place to live, especially, if I was working in the research park.
I would agree with that. In some ways, it's like if you look on that map, it's Wessex. That would be the main place that somebody would go to rent. In fact, I'm sure a ton of Workiva people. I direct a comment to you now.
Sure. Yeah. It's comments or staff questions.
What are your thoughts on, the fact that this would become mixed use instead of just straight up commercial? By making this zoning change, are we impacting the great availability of whatever built or folks who may be interested in that land there for commercial use?
Are you talking about the narrow focus of the two lots, or are you talking about the broader research park?
Both.
Okay, so So generally with mixed use on the individual lots, because of the parking requirements, you do have to displace something. Yes, it's more efficient to build up and use the space. If you could build, I'm going to make up numbers. If you could build 50,000 square feet of commercial on a 4-acre lot, adding the apartments means you're going to build somewhat less commercial. So a little bit less would be built because of the parking displacement for the housing. In this case, I don't know that the research park is saying that they would have built 50,000 commercial if they didn't have apartments. I don't know that that's true or not. So in a lot of areas, you'll hear me talk about mixed use is great, but you are giving up other things. You're giving up configuration of building. You are giving up probably gross floor area for that.
Right.
And when we usually do mixed use is because we want that there to add intensity, add the users. And that's the research park's argument here too. Now, I think I did address originally that the question of future users of lots really will come down in my mind to that business operation. If they don't want to be by sensitive receptors, they're not going to come here.
Right.
That's just a fact for most people. And as you can see in this map, there are residential uses adjacent. This will be the first time we pull them into the research park into a more immediate location for that. So you have to kind of probably rely, again, I said, the fact that it's a master planned park versus just general industrial, it's a lot different in terms of user mix. There is some reliance that would be the case. Again, an R&D or a research use, it's not about having hazardous materials that people are exposed to. It's the accidental release. It's the materials you keep on site for your R&D process. And those are accidental releases. No one intends for that to happen.
Right. Thank you.
Yep. I did a bad job of putting this report together because we just focused on the one exhibit and didn't give you the broader picture. We should have also had a land use map in here. The concept of mixed use is actually in our land use plan and Ames Plan 2040 on the west side of University. So at that roundabout with Collaboration Way, we did for expansion of commercial and labeled that a neighborhood commercial mixed use node. So that concept of trying to be smart growth and have intensity and be next to the research park, that is baked into the land use plan. It just wasn't contemplated in Plan 2040 to push into the hub area. So it's not that idea is a poor idea. It's just whether we really believe it's the right fit here. That's where we're coming from.
What kind of numbers, how many housing units are possible?
So this text amendment doesn't address density or max or minimum requirements. So it would just be a product of the efficiency of the layout for the development.
I mean, just based on square footage, a lot. It could be.
But since it has to be mixed use, it won't be nearly as much as if it was just residential, because they have to. They're going to fit on a footprint.
That much commercial to go.
They have to fit on that footprint of a commercial building, which is not going to be as efficient as just laying out an apartment building. So they're going to have a confined pattern, like we said. Westtown has examples of what those buildings look like. I think we thought we said in the report, like somewhere of a 7,000 to 12,000 square foot footprint is probably a general idea of what the base commercial is on each one of those. And if you have 2 or 3 stories of apartments above, it's not a large number per building. Versus a 4-story apartment building, that's when you really get your density in the RH type of environment, and that won't be this.
About the petitioner's comment about the 12-foot minimum ceiling text.
That was not meant to apply above the first floor, so we'll clarify that. So if you're wondering why we care about that, if again, when you see me and we're talking about mixed use, I'm always going to be emphasizing you should expect a usable operationally, a normal operatable commercial space. And we have height expectations for a certain type of look, flexibility of tenants and other things that all go into that. So whenever we talk about mixed use, I'll usually throw those kinds of things into the discussion to make sure, again, we just talked about Westtown. There's things about Westtown that don't work commercially. And we don't want to repeat those mistakes. So we do try to address that with each time we do mixed use since that time period to make sure we are focused on the usability of the commercial and not just apartments above empty space. Here, obviously, the research park doesn't want empty space. They're about the commercial user as much as the residential user.
Just to reaffirm, if this went through, this requires a major site development plan that would come back through before.
Yep. So it'll come to the commission for a recommendation, then and then also the city council has to review it to approve it.
Can you describe some of the housing configurations that would be allowed in a mixed-use development? I mean, what would the apartments have to conform to in terms of garages?
So we do not require covered parking for any resident for almost all. Basically, we don't require covered parking for residential uses in the city in any zoning district. So there may or may not be garages with this. Probably principally surface park. There could be easily some accessory covered parking spaces. I highly doubt that there will be any kind of structured parking or anything like that. So I think the intent from our preliminary review comments is you're thinking 3-story buildings primarily or almost all surface parked. And then we in here are not talking about bedroom configurations. The only thing we have in here is that 90% of the ground floor must be commercial. So it's pretty wide open in terms of the configuration of the residential. And then if you're wondering, well, what are the parking requirements? Essentially, in an apartment, it's 1 parking space per bedroom. So if you were to try to build a 4-bedroom apartment, you're going to use up way more of your space having to park 4 vehicles for that unit.
But they're going to go for 1 and 2 if they're appealing to young professionals.
Yeah, the intent, from what I've seen, again, the intent is 2 bedrooms or less.
Yep.
And that's the most common model we see for this type of building format. And that's where in the site plan, you'll get that information. And that's why we have those guidelines. Hey, we have to understand what's the impact of the commercial how much square footage are we getting? Is there available parking for the commercial uses so that maintains its viability? And then we're going to look at how the residential functions on the site. And then the design guidelines here are the buildings will be up to the street, so the parking will be behind. It won't be a front yard parking lot. It'll be designed up to as a loop in collaboration place.
Any further discussion? Do we have a motion?
I'm not opposed to this, but I'm not seeing that it's a dent in the problem of lack of that kind of housing. Since it has the commercial part requirement underneath, I'm all for mixed use and having all the housing we need. It's just, I don't quite follow the argument that it's solving a problem. It's making a small dent in a problem. And maybe it's making better use of the area by doing this, even in a fairly limited way. But I don't see that it can, with that many employees, that many people we're talking about, I don't think it's the whole answer at all to the lack of housing for that population.
I don't think it would be the whole answer, but a dent is still a dent.
Everything
It's
else.
still useful.
Got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion?
I would move to recommend alternative 1, recommend that the city council amend the Research Park RI zoning district to permit mixed use development in the hub activity area as presented in attachment B.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
All
Job,
right, so
folks.
that-
We got a 4-2 vote. That's
Yeah.
discussion there at least. That's good.
all right, so this item will move on to the city council for review. It's probably about a month.
Okay. We'll move on to item number 10. A hearing for consideration and recommendation on whether to allow an administrative alternative design review process of up to 20% of certain identified zone and site design numeric requirements.
So I'm going to lead off, but Justin's really going to walk you through this item. So this is probably a really exciting item for you because it's all zoning and it has some details behind it that you're probably not using on a regular basis. So City Council overall has had some goals for the last year to improve processes, to look at being more flexible, to encourage projects to succeed through the city. So zoning is a very restrictive regulatory scheme. That's just by its very nature, that's what it's meant to do. So there are limits on how flexible you can be and actually apply zoning to property. And we all are using zoning to regulate use as well as the features that are built onto a site. This proposal is dealing not at all with use. So there's no variability of use allowed here. It is really to look at 20% design alternatives to standards that have a numeric value. So we're doing this to try to grant some flexibility as it describes in the report. There are criteria. It is all administrative as proposed. So that's a little bit of a departure also in terms of how these things are typically done, even if they are done. It is meant to be efficient and administrative to the extent that it can be done that way. If an item does come to the commission or to the council, that same authority is vested with that review process. So it just goes with the project. It doesn't just stay at staff level or just at the council level. So I'm going to have Justin walk through the particulars of what's proposed and what does this mean and not mean. And then obviously we are the applicant, we're the city. So we're here for questions and discussion.
So some new folks. I'm Justin Moore. I'm one of the planners in the planning department. And so just kind of coming off of what Kelly said. So as I'm sure you read through the report, just to kind of summarize, what does this mean? So as you read, we obviously have our zoning board of adjustment that can review variances, special exceptions, and that sort of thing, which I'll get into here in just a second. But what this is giving staff the ability to be able to take any physical aspect of site development in our base zones or our general site development standards, and with proper review, be able to adjust or grant a waiver of sorts of 20% up to 20%. If it's found by the planning director, if it's found that it's appropriate. And this stems from the city council direction. We gave city council the information that they asked us for over the last several months. And last month they directed us to go forward and to draft this up. We've been doing in recent years a lot of text amendments, 42 just to the zoning ordinance alone that have been approved since 2015. That is, there's a lot of different factors that go into that, but council's been looking at several different things about how to provide more flexibility, how to make projects that are otherwise generally good projects achievable. And so this is what we've drafted and come up with for you to look at tonight. Now, the types of things that this is going to apply to, like I said, are those physical aspects. So, your setbacks. It could apply to quantity of landscaping that's required, that sort of thing. Those performance measures, residential density, no, it will not apply to that. Use-related matters as well, amount of residential versus commercial in a building or on a floor, no, that would not be eligible either. These are physical site items that we typically see there. It will occur on site development plans, by and large, for the most part. These will also be reviewed, these types of requests, which it'll be a permit process. These can be reviewed with building permits for single-family homes and duplexes as well, and so they'll be caught through that building permit review process on that end. So we'll set up the administrative process for that. So we talked about ZBA. So zoning board of adjustment. The two key things that they do that probably look similar to this, or that this looks similar to, are variances and special exceptions. But there are clearly differences. So the criteria for a variance, I just put up there just to kind of give you an idea of what an applicant for a variance has to meet legally in order to, and they have to meet all of those So it's a pretty high bar in order to get any sort of a variance. So right now, if an applicant, just for their own reasons or believing that they have the basis for it, came to us today and wanted a 20% adjustment to a setback or something like that, most likely they would have to apply for this. And in the vast majority of cases, they're not going to meet all those legal criteria. So the variance process will still be there because, again, the 20% allowance, those minor deviations will fall outside or below the variance threshold. That's a much higher bar that has to be met to be granted. The other thing that the Zoning Board of Adjustment has is they have special exception authority. So they can grant special exceptions, and I've put I think the majority of them up there that the Board of Adjustment has. And the special exceptions are very specific in our ordinance. So they over time have been crafted for specific needs within the community. And there's things that they can do that, again, these would oftentimes exceed a minor adjustment of up to 20%. Some of these things fall outside of it. But I've got them listed up there. You could look at some of these and say that there's a little bit of overlap, and there could be on the real low end of things. But by and large, that's also the goal of council, is to be able to give staff the ability to just see these types of minor requests, and the larger things will go to the Board of Adjustment. So again, there are some things in there in the commercial zones, and also several things in the residential single family attached and detached that they're able to do with minor area modifications, which again have their own set of criteria. And those criteria are, the applicants have to demonstrate that they meet in those processes. One thing too that I should mention that the Board of Adjustment does is special use permits. Now, special use permits, the reason this probably matters is because oftentimes a special use permit may require a site development plan. So if a site development plan has to go with a special use permit, and in that site development plan review process, an applicant requests through these new standards a 20% adjustment to a given standard or multiple standards, we would come to a conclusion as staff whether we would support that. And then when that went forward to the Board of Adjustment, we would send with it that recommendation accordingly. So that's how that would work through the special use permit review process. So I just threw up there a few examples. Again, these are just kind of just a brainstorm of probably simpler situations that you would see, and we mentioned some of that in the report. But we talked about a little bit in the report. We would round any remainder on a 20% calculation. So that first example, if you had an 8-foot setback and there was a request they wanted to use their full 20%, and we found that it met our criteria that we're recommending in option 1, they would be able to go to 6 feet under how we would propose to round it. Again, landscaping, if there were, for example, 10 shrubs required and they were able to get their 20% exception, they could only plant 8. And then again, it could apply to lot coverage, open space, 20% less than minimum. So those sorts of things would just be an example. And we did put that in those, we did that bulleted list in those attachments for you. So I think the key to gain from all of it is that it's to make projects easier to achieve through minor site design alteration allowances. So really and we also did put that chart in there of the zones that it would apply to. So this is one other thing I wanted to go over quick and just pull up on screen for you. So all of the base zones that you see there, they're the ones listed first. So those are going to be all of your standard, RL, RM, RH, HOC. Those are highway-oriented commercial, low-density residential. We also have some special purpose and overlay districts in there, primarily because those function very straightforward, either with an existing base zone or as a base zone itself. The South Lincoln mixed use area is really its own base zone, even though it's a special purpose district. There are some overlay zones, though, that due to the unique nature of them and their standards being slightly more complex, a 20% deviation starts to get challenging or starts to get difficult, and it might present issues with some of the goals that those overlay zones have. So those are the ones that we have not included. And again, things like PUDs, those are designed with flexibility in mind. So we don't see the need for that. PUDs, though, are also put on top of base zones to begin with. And then, of course, our Article 4 development standards there at the bottom, which are all of the general standards that have standards for landscaping, some accessory building information, some other things that just kind of guide any site development across the city. And that's also where we're proposing to move our drive-through standards that are currently in Article 13, because many of those drive-throughs are on commercial sites, oftentimes in HOC that would likely come up with a request for this sort of an allowance. So again, we put our recommendation in there. Our staff recommendation is option 1, obviously with those criteria. There's a second option in there that we discuss, and that's more of a broad option as far as there aren't really defined criteria. We would still review it as staff, but there are prescribed elements that would be eligible only to be able to be requested. Anything that's not on the list would not. And then, finally, we talked a little bit about different forms of options that alternatively could be created. You could come up with an alternative idea for pre-existing sites versus, new greenfield sites that haven't been developed and different standards for each. But we really feel like option 1 is probably the best approach because it allows us to still have criteria, but it leaves the different elements of the site open to be discussed with staff through the DRC process, and then we can decide if it's appropriate. So I think that covers the gist of it, and I can answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions?
I feel like the 20% is good to give staff some of that flexibility and get them moving on projects that they need to keep moving on instead of having to come to us. So.
Can I ask 2 questions about previous items that have come before the commission? First one is I'm thinking back a couple of meetings about the transformer at the supercharger. That seemed like a common sense thing. Petitioner wanted different setback, if I recall. That would be something that would be covered under this. Staff would be able to say that makes sense as long as it's within the 20%. And then it doesn't come before the commission. There's no public hearing necessarily about that. It just happens.
Yeah, the specifics of that one, I'm not sure it fit within the 20% envelope, but if it did, yes, it probably would never have been proposed as a text amendment. There's a couple of different factors at play there in terms of what can go in a front yard setback, as well as some space dimensional issues. The dimensional ones, the 20% would allow. It probably would have helped. It may not have gone all the way that they wanted.
Mm-hmm. And another one is there's some certain rules about how parking has to be in line and trucks have to connect as the base. And there's an understanding that these 2 things are true, right? That they connect and that they're in line. How much variability would there be in applying different standards?
So I'm glad you brought it up. We will likely propose to council it doesn't apply to the ADU standards. So the ADU standards, that the 3 that are most critical is there's a max size, maximum number of bedrooms, and 1 parking space. So you can't have less than 1. If I take 20% of a parking space away, I still need to have a parking space.
Right.
The intent was 900 feet is the max accessory structure that we have, going to 1080 for a 1-bedroom structure. And again, you're not trying to bump it up to 2 bedrooms. So we're going to propose to council ADUs are excluded as a discrete use from the 20%. I just don't know where the benefits come into that one, because of the time that was invested in crafting those particular mix of standards. Unfortunately, it lives in Article 4, so that's why it looks like it could apply to it. That makes me a little nervous with what we all just agreed to in terms of what those standards are. The duplex standard we just adopted too. I don't know that there was a numeric standard in that directly that the 20% may or may not apply to. We'll look at that. Most of those were design guidelines for compatibility about roof form and entryway. There is one offset standard in there. That 20% wouldn't really matter for that. Those are the two more recent, like design oriented kind of things that are in Article 4. ADUs probably shouldn't. Duplexes probably isn't a big deal if it applies to them. It does bring up some questions. We said density is not going to be impacted, but we also have lots within these tables that are allowed to be a 20% deviation from. So somehow we're going to have to balance. And again, it's not a given that you get the 20%, right? There's some criteria that we've articulated here. You got to meet the intent. So it's possible to be lot size variance, but still within the density caps is probably how it has to work. So that's still doable. You can have both at the same time. You just can't double the density of a zoning district or a development through changing the 20% minimum lot area, and all of a sudden you have all duplexes where that wasn't possible before. That's not going to happen. Staff's not going to agree to that as meeting the intent.
Last question I have is, in the text of the ordinance, is it staff's intention that the petitioner has to meet all of the requirements of subsection 1 through 5, or any of them?
Let me just get to that page quick.
Right there on the screen.
The intent, it's conceivable that they don't all apply. So I think the way it'll ultimately get worded is these are all factors in the decision. They're not necessarily you must meet all of them. That is, I understand the way that's written right now, that doesn't come through that way, but the intent is that these are factors that influence the decision of the director of meeting the general purpose and intent of that standard, that zone, whatever the condition is.
Any further questions? Does anyone from the public have any questions or comments?
Still Chuck Winkleblack, 105 South 16th Street. I mean, I think this is a great step forward. I don't know how many of the 42 text amendments I was a part of, but maybe not 50%, but certainly over 25%, I would guess. And it was really frustrating, I think, for both us as applicants and staff to go, look, our hands are tied. You're close. We agree this might not be the best use, but our hands are tied. And what you don't understand then is, and then we'd go, well, first you have to write a letter to council. You have to get council to agree to refer it back to staff, and staff has to bring a report back to council. Then we have to make a staff report that we go to plan, and then go to council 3 times. So we would lose 3 or 4 months of time for things that we would, sometimes we don't always agree at DRC, but a lot of times we do, but staff would just say, look, we just don't have any option here. It doesn't quite meet it. And I think the other thing, and I don't know, Justin, I don't know if you have the stats, but how many variances do you suppose have been approved in the last 5 or 10 years? My guess is the number is close to 0. If it's not
I know
0,
you got one for your staircase. Again,
what's that?
for your staircase, an example of something that, so for example, what we're talking about, there was a non-conforming staircase on a 4-plex, always been a staircase, couldn't meet landing requirements. We had to go do a variance for a small encroachment in a setback. If we had this allowance, they wouldn't have even had to go to ZBA for a variance. Again, a minor thing.
Right. My point is, to meet all 5 criteria of a variance, most of the time staff says, don't even try it because you won't meet all 5 of those criteria. And so there was just no mechanism for, and we sometimes we joke about saying we can't use common sense in this building, but it was like there'd be times where we'd agree, everybody would agree, but there just is no mechanism. So this is a great step forward. I don't think you have to worry about staff caving in and doing things that are adverse to the city's best interest, but this is a great minimal step of allowing for a little bit of flexibility. And a lot of those text, a lot of times they were probably single use things. And so we spent a whole lot of staff time trying to adapt for one specific use that may or may not ever get applied again. But they also had to worry about, okay, well, if we're going to change the code, then we have to apply that universally to all the codes. So what are the impacts of all this on all of our codes? And so a little bit of flexibility. I think staff did a great job about laying out the issues, and hope you support option number 1 to just allow a little bit of flexibility, save everybody time and a little bit of anxiety. Thanks.
Okay, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, we did catalog all the text amendments. I don't know if you remember that off the top of your head. When we first started this process with council,
Right.
we went and audited 7 years of text amendment. Was there 70 some text amendments? Unfortunately, maybe only like 30% of those would this rule have helped, because many of them do become use-based for something. So this isn't the end of text amendments. It just will reduce the really small or trivial ones from coming up. So an example was Ames Ford last year. They partly related to the charger issue. They had a small percentage of landscaping that had to be displaced to put chargers in, and they were non-conforming. So we did a text amendment to say chargers can now allow for an exception to landscape areas. Well, this rule would have made that moot. It wouldn't have mattered. None of us were ever going to know that 700 square feet of grass wasn't on the Ames Ford site. That's the kind of thing this is. Little small amendments. Use amendments are still going to issues like large parking reductions. We've redone many regulations in the last 3 years. I don't know if 20% is even going to matter anymore for those, because we've updated so many parking regulations in the city. But it will apply if someone really needs another 20%. That's going to be possible now off of the other amendments we've already made. I think the focus on that list, number 6. Not all of those were criteria. It's kind of started to be a list of things, but number 6 was that list of things that we are not, as staff, saying you could get any version of a 20% change from. I'll point out fence height standards. That's one where we kind of went back and forth on. Typically, it's a 4-foot limit in the front yard, 6 foot on side and rear yards. We weren't sure there was a big gain there to allow for height variations in fences, so we did say we were going to leave that as is. We did touch on ADUs. Adult businesses have some of their own standards. We didn't want to get into that. Those other ones are some very small details about functionality and safety issues that we have across the city. Again, we probably just wouldn't agree to them, but we just wanted to say it's not even a choice to look at that. So that's that list.
Any further questions or comments? Do we have a motion?
Make a motion. I'd recommend option 1. Recommend the city council approve option number 1, draft ordinance language, attachment A, which establishes criteria for considering 20% alternative design for specific base zone development standards in numeric development standards of Article 4.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Okay. And the question was always asked, are we going next time?
Probably. I believe we have at least one text amendment and maybe another thing as well. So there's still going to be a lot of text amendments coming. I'm warning you, this summer we got a lot of stuff coming still. Like I said, council's been asking staff to review development processes and different things. So there's a number of process review things in work. Some of the some of the standards themselves will be coming back to you this summer. So I would expect us to have our next meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Adjourned.